Okay, are we all ready then? Let's go ahead and start. No, thank you guys for your time coming in. Everybody has other things to do, so we'll try to get through this as fast as we can. Good afternoon, Jamie. I know we're gonna go over, we'll start with the fire. On the agreement, the first section was page 1, paragraph 1 of the agreement. And I'm not sure, it looks like that the strike from that was at its discretion to the city. And basically just saying that all the equipment would be used for the fire protection and the emergency response, both for the city and for the local district, the fire district. Is that correct?
Where did you add on that?
Okay, so the first page,
Yeah.
it's crossed out number 1 and it has 2.
Oh, okay.
I think it was, you guys had just at its discretion.
Yeah.
That's the difference with that. And so, do we need to hash out anything like that? I do want to make sure.
So just so that you.
Okay, and from my understanding, for Jamie's email and from Lee's corresponding with Jamie, there are some things that are statutorily required. So if that comes up and you stop us or explain, Lee, I don't know if Jamie's.
Yep, he's.
Oh,
Just fire off questions if you need me to say something. I'm following along with my copies of the documents too.
okay, thank you.
What is item 1.1 under the agreement, cooperative undertaking resulting from this agreement? So it starts.
Jamie?
I had a note from the documents that I received that was a requested insertion into this agreement as to become the very first paragraph, which that's what automatically renumbered every single thing that came after it. That was a phrase that was in the EMS agreement that was requested to be brought over to this one as well. It's an important distinction because the statutes that govern 2080s have several things that apply based on whether or not a new legal entity is created or not. And in the 2080 agreements that currently exist and are proposed to exist in the future, we are not creating a new entity. We may create a board to supervise it, but the agreement does not create a new full-fledged legal entity with rights and responsibilities all on its own.
This contract is stating that we're not doing this, right?
Correct. So that's, yeah, it's an affirmative statement that.
But that's not a provision.
Right.
Okay, now I get it.
That's the way I read it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
This refers to us and the city. It doesn't bring the fire department. I mean, it's just between fire agreements.
Yes. that's fine.
Okay, now I get it.
Okay.
Just clarification.
Yeah.
Okay, the second point was page 2, paragraph 6. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, if you're looking at your documents that you provided with the city, those are have a midline going through like 6, 7, and then because that added legal statement at the beginning was 1, it just pushed all your guys' items down. Does that make sense? Okay, I just wanted to make sure everybody was kind of following.
Yep.
Okay, and so in that item, this city shall arrange for payment of all operating and maintenance expenses, including cost of all insurance necessary for furnishing fire protection and emergency services within the city fire district, subject to financial provisions of this agreement. Are we all good with that? A lot of what Bill had in was more of a statement, not a part of the 2080 agreement. Okay? Stop me if I'm going too fast or we need to stop and look at something, okay? If I don't hear anything, then I'm just kind of moving on. Page 2, paragraph 7, has, it looks like the words that are changed in this provision, if you're okay with me not reading everything, is that fine? Okay.
Yeah.
Is basically just added in there and income received in the provision.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we're gonna go on to paragraph 8. We have in operating expenses crossed out, and also the township clerk or the is crossed out. We have that the treasurer of the fire district shall promptly transmit on or before December 15th and June 15th of each year. Tax is crossed out, the agreed upon amount of monies, that's the added portion. Is there any issue with that?
Yeah, that was just clarification that this was for the fire and ambulance for the fire reserve fund.
Okay.
To
And this-
differentiate that this wasn't supposed to be for the operating maintenance expenses, it was for the reserve fund.
But does this language satisfy that though, for you guys?
Because I think the paragraph above talks about the operating costs.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay, yeah, I did, because a lot of these were changes that you guys were looking at or
Right,
wanted, so
right.
that's the reason why I'm second, before we move on, that there's any clarification we need to make, we need to make it.
Unless, just to make it very clear, somewhere here we talk about the agreed upon amount of replacement funds.
Next paragraph.
Next paragraph.
9, 9 and 10.
Yeah, so
We can make reference, I don't know if we need to.
I
Purchase replacement costs. Just
Right.
to make it clear that-
and there's not a dollar amount written into this contract. I
Yeah,
think
let's get that figured out.
we'll have to get that figured out. It's just the wording that's gonna be in this is the next paragraph. It's actually paragraph 10, but for your guys, it's old language, paragraph 9. And we have the amount given each year. There's a typo, but we'll get that fixed. Will be, and then that's blank. See exhibit D. Crossed out is city and fire district shall each contribute to this fund and the amount set by the parties each fiscal year at the first fire meeting of the fiscal year. And what was added in that place was the parties may contribute additional funds received in excess of the required contribution as may be available. And then the last sentence of that is expenditure of these funds requires the agreement of both parties.
Now, do we have exhibit D yet?
No, because and Jamie, if I understand that correctly, exhibit D was going to be the outline based upon the agreed upon amount. So when you're in a budget discussion, am I correctly understanding that, Jamie?
Yeah, so throughout the document, when I had proposed it even, was the use of exhibits makes ongoing amendment and updating much easier, because then there's just a schedule attached to something that we can quickly substitute a new D for an old D, because the numbers are going to change every year based on so many different factors. And this allows us the flexibility to update the agreement without cracking it open for a complete amendment and revision every time. So when Lee sent me everything, what I tried to do was take the draft we started with and redline in the changes that the district had asked for so that we could see the differences. So like in former paragraph 8, now renumbered to 9, we had originally proposed December 1, and it was requested to change that to December 15, and June 1 to June 15. So you can see that that's where those changes are coming from. But I am concerned about the elimination of the word operating expenses. Then how is the district gonna pay any portion of operating expenses if it's not coming from the tax levy?
That's covered in 7(8).
Right, but where will you find, but that's what I'm saying, is that this is about tax levy, so where will the money come from? Right, because paragraph 8.9 is about the fire district levying taxes to pay for its share of costs of equipment. That's where you're proposing to limit it. So then where will the district propose to get money to pay its proportional costs of operating expenses that are required to be paid in 7.8? We have different topics, and that's what I'm saying is that the paragraph 8.9 is about your revenue source, and 7.8 is about your agreement to pay certain things.
And the revenue source for the rural people is kind of irrelevant. We only have one source unless somebody gives us a bunch of money.
Right, and that's why the source has to cover everything, which it's not just equipment. Your tax levy covers your entire obligation to the agreement one way or another, but we have equipment and we have operating costs. So I didn't understand the removal of that term from how your monies could be spent.
Well, the thought process behind that was if there's another funding stream in the future that would not be derived from property taxes, then we could substitute that. But again, it really doesn't matter where we get the monies, just as long as we pay them.
Pay the bills.
Yeah, we just pay the bills. We don't, from the city standpoint, we don't really care where the money comes from.
You're just not wanting to limit it to just tax in case something else would come.
Another funding stream comes.
All right.
We thought it was confusing to talk about operating expenses in paragraph, 8 now, and then talk about operating expenses in paragraph 9 now, because paragraph 9 deals with that agreed upon cost for the reserve fund. So we just wanted to clear it up that 8 deals with operating expenses, 9 deals with reserve fund. Didn't see why operating expenses was part of the reserve fund, because that's not the purpose of the reserve fund.
Well, paragraph 8 deals with agreeing to proportional shares of the cost of the agreement. And paragraph 9 is not about the reserve fund at all. It's about how you get your money.
No, it's absolutely not.
There's ambiguity there, and I see what you're saying, but I'm wondering, do we need to, should we, instead of dividing them out in that conceptual way, should something be said more like, the city and the fire district shall divide the cost of this agreement equally?
I'm having a hard time understanding what he's saying, Lee.
So he's saying that, is it the thought that, that the city and the rules should divide the cost equally?
The cost of what?
The expenses.
Well, that's already designated up in paragraph 8.
Yeah.
So make sure I understand. So in
The city and fire
paragraph,
district will divide operating and maintenance expenses equally. That's taken care of.
I think he's saying the capital expenses,
So what you say, what?
capital
like what
expenditures.
you use in reserve for, why you put.
And that's dealt with in paragraph 10, correct?
9 and 10 are just saying where the money's going from.
Well, no, 9 deals with how much money both the rural and the city is going to put into the reserve fund each year. That's above and beyond the monthly operating expenses.
So one paragraph is describing, day-to-day operational expenditures.
Yes, paragraph 8.
And then the next paragraph is, describing, reserve for capital equipment.
Yes.
Yes.
You understand that, Jamie?
I understand that's how it's being interpreted, but that's not how it was intended, so I'm trying to think of what to do.
Mhm.
The goal of paragraph 9 is the obligation to levy taxes by the fire district. It wasn't meant to start separating out what monies go where, because at the end of the day, all of your monies go to the fire, services program. But I understand the point you're making, and I see how it gets confusing. So perhaps we need a simple statement that the city and the fire district are going to divide the costs of the operating and maintenance expenses equally. And then there's some procedural stuff behind how we're gonna, handle that every month.
Mhm.
Well, you say that in paragraph 8, the first sentence.
Right, I'm saying, should that be a standalone paragraph because we have other issues we're trying to deal with? Like, should that sentence just be by itself? Because the rest of paragraph 8 is a procedural paragraph that talks about how we move money around.
Well, no, it doesn't, because the rest of that paragraph says that the city's going to provide a specific statement each month, so our fire district treasurer can pay the expense on a monthly basis.
And that's where Jamie's saying, so what we've talked about is we have a procedure, and that's where he's saying that's more of a procedure. So we have an agreed upon procedure.
So you say the city and fire district shall provide the operating and maintenance expenses equally, should stand alone. Be its own paragraph,
Mhm.
and then continue on with a new paragraph with the rest of the procedure.
Did you hear that, Jamie?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Did I get that right? Yeah.
Okay, so basically what we would do is the procedure of it would say in 8, and would the first sentence go down to 9?
I think it's a whole different, it's a brand new paragraph, isn't it?
Yeah, I think 8 you gotta leave first. That talks about dividing the operating and maintenance expenses, and then the rest of that would become,
8A would be the procedure on how we're gonna do it,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, we could do that. We could do city and the fire department shall divide the operating and maintenance expenses equally, and then we could have subparagraph 8A. Yeah, I like that idea. That helps to clarify there's a statement concept, and then there's some procedures on how we accomplish it.
Right?
I think what his original, Jamie's, I see what he means on paragraph 9, he was saying operating, it's telling how we're gonna divide it, but it still doesn't say anywhere how the operating money can be paid.
No, number 9, we're taking that operating expense out.
Yes, mine deals with equipment.
Is that what Jamie was? But isn't that how we're paying operating expenses?
We're not paying them now. It's not good.
Well, and we're supposed to be paying the operating expenses monthly, whereas that reserve fund, both the city and the rural puts in a chunk of money twice a year.
But it's
Right.
still paid through the levy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jamie, I haven't really personally got to talk to you, and I don't know if the public safety committee met and talked in length or whatever, but a lot of these things are crossed out. We're okay crossing out in operating expenses from paragraph 9.
Okay.
That's where I guess when we start going through this Public Safety Committee, Jose or Robbie or Lee,
Mhm.
you know, I need, you know, somebody to speak up since I've been, you know, gone for 2 weeks. Because I'm figuring if we just keep moving, there's no objections, then.
Okay. So I understand the objection to 9 is a concern that we're limiting the income source for the fire district to tax levy only, and you have the ability to receive donations and find other sources of funding that need to be usable, right?
So, Jamie, I just want to interject with, would it be just a thought to combine 8 and 9 and then have sub-paragraphs when you're giving the procedure for, you know, combine those two with the primary sentence and then have the sub-paragraphs that outline the procedure of that information?
Yeah, I think I can rework that and that'll make more sense because we're talking about you know, yeah, I think ideally, I think we can rework that into one paragraph that talks about the way money moves both monthly and for the equipment reserve fund, and that makes more sense to do it in sub-paragraphs.
And could we also add another word there on paragraph 9, that first sentence, fire districts shall levy enough taxes within the tax limitations prescribed by the Code of Iowa, pay for the fire district's agreed upon share of the cost of replacement equipment.
Yes, good, that's a good, I like that.
I'm still getting hung up on this agreement saying where our monies are gonna come from, because there could be legislation that comes down that we would be replacement for property tax dollars. And again, it shouldn't matter where the monies originate from. It's just that we pay our agreed upon installment.
Right, I need to loosen that up so you have a lot more flexibility in funding. That's an excellent point, and I copy that, and I will work that into a rework of that section.
Okay. Anything else from 8 and 9 then? We'll bring back some wording and kind of combine it together and solution of. Okay. On to paragraph 10. No, I already went over that, and then we went back to 8 and 9. So on 10, is there anything that we need to go over?
I had something that came to mind on the interest-bearing fund. What does that interest automatically go back into that fund, or what happens to the interest earned?
The interest is receipted back into the designated. So for example, if it's a fire,
It's just
reserve, then it goes into the fire reserve interest. It gets receipted into the reserve.
Okay, so the interest earned goes back into the reserve.
Correct.
Okay.
Can you add that into the report that they get?
Yep.
Because we get that every.
Yep. Mhm.
So.
And the one I had done, they did a running interest on it. The original one that I provided, I have another file on it. So.
And then that new paragraph 10, the last sentence, the red part, when it says as may be available, since the qualifier in that beginning of that sentence is may contribute, we can still keep our own reserve fund in the rural part. Remind us to answer that question.
I think you just did.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just gotta talk about it.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else?
So just to go back to that exhibit D, just to clarify, so it was my understanding, part of a process that we'll be working on is we will have budget meetings starting in August. And exhibit D would then be drafted based on our budget as to the reserve. So for example, right now it's with the 17,000 to the fire reserve each and 20,000 to ambulance. So in exhibit D, that's what we would use to outline that in. Some years, maybe we have to give a little bit more. It would depend on our meeting with our tax levies, but I believe that's what Jamie's saying, is that would be a workable exhibit because it'd be based on our budget meetings and.
And you said that would take place when?
So I'm proposing that we would start in August, because I know that trustees have to provide your reports to the county before we have to submit our budget, so that way that allows them time.
It would just make it much easier that way if we just change the exhibits rather than the entire.
Yep, and that was what his first proposal.
Right, exhibit D can't be produced until we agree.
Right, yeah.
Okay?
Does that sound good, Jamie?
Yep.
Okay.
So do we need to just keep the current stuff right now? You guys are giving the current amount that we're giving?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
On paragraph 12, there was some additions. The bodily injury was added to $1 million, $3 million annually, property damage, $1 million, and $3 million. And the very last paragraph of that, instead of city reserves, it was crossed out and it's put in its place. The parties each reserve their rights under the Iowa Municipal Court Liability Act, the doctrine. And then when we get back to the last part of that sentence, it was just crossed out. So really, I think it was mostly just clarifying the dollar amounts that was on.
Yeah, I think that was the thing, we figured it was a typo.
Yes.
Only 1,000 before, yeah. Yep.
Because I think it was 100,000 was the first time it was. something
And
like that.
300,000, I believe.
We just
Right.
received the insurance,
Okay,
so
so,
I'll verify it.
okay, so, paragraph. I'm trying to keep track of your guys' deal. Paragraph 12 that you guys have put in is actually paragraph 13. I do not see any red marks in there. Is there anything that's changed? Or we need to change anything?
So our insurance policy is 2 million.
For bodily injury.
For bodily injury, but that also includes, there's several other breakdowns with that, because it could be not just, loss of a limb and other, there's a lot of breakdowns in there, but $2 million is the cap.
Would that also be an exhibit that may be attached to this, depending on how our insurance changes from year to year?
Does the annual aggregate and property damage and annual aggregate stay at the million, or does that change to 2 million and whatever for the aggregate?
It is 2 million.
Then what about the aggregate?
I will have to have them provide me, because what I'm just looking at right now is the entire policy. So I can have our broker break down specific to the fire and the ambulance for all of those.
Yeah, so we probably should know those and have that specified in the agreement too, so we need to have those up to date.
I guess what I would just propose is that part of those subcategories, that we would just add that in as additional documentation to be provided, because April 1 is when our policy renews. So I would recommend that we put that a part of that subcategory as those procedures that we need to provide, along with those monthly statements.
Yeah, because remember, these are just minimums that the agreement requires. The city is currently providing 2 million per occurrence, so it's probably providing 4 or 6 million annual aggregate because those are usually multiples. So an agreement calling for 1 and 3, that's the minimum they could ever provide. They're currently providing more.
So you're guessing the aggregate, if our bodily property damage is 2 million, you're guessing the annual aggregate to be 600?
Yeah.
6 million.
Yeah, it may be 4, it could be as high as 6. Aggregates are usually a multiple of 2 or 3, depending upon the insurer. But you're getting more coverage than the proposed agreement requires. If you change the numbers, we can do that. It's just that it's always, because the city participates in a municipal insurance program, and so they don't always have exact control over their coverage amounts. It has to do with that whole program and, their reserves, and because they're in a captive. And so their insurance program is a very complex matrix, but, if it sounds like we're getting at least 2 million per occurrence, it would be shocking to me that it's not 4 or 6 million annual aggregates.
And if it would be easier to make that as an exhibit, I think we'd be okay.
Just add that terminology here that it's minimally.
Minimum, yeah, and that way we don't have to throw the whole thing out too.
So you'd like to say it something along the city shall provide at least 1 million, 3 million, and then we can go from there? Okay.
Okay. So on the paragraph, the old paragraph 12 to 13, from Bill, you guys had, there should be an exception where the parties are not, indemnified or held harmless in an event of one of the parties to the agreement breaches the terms, and then there's several other sentences. I know that there's no red lines or anything that we had changed from that prior. Is this paragraph good? You guys did that meet your guys' expectations? I just want, okay. On page, or paragraph 14, which was your guys' 13, and it had to be the last sentence. There was a issue with the last sentence where you guys had wanted the board shall prepare a proposed budget for the services provided according to the agreement shall be submitted, or shall submit the proposed budget to the city. And we crossed out is the however the city shall have full and final authority over the budget, may authorize the budget without approval of the board, but subject to the funding obligations of the party as outlined in the agreement.
Yeah, so I had sent a comment back to the city. We can strike that sentence, gentlemen, but I need you to understand that Iowa Code 28E subpart 32 subpart 3 states that the proposed budget shall be submitted to the municipality providing the services. However, the municipality providing the services shall have full and final authority over the proposed budget and may alter the proposed budget without approval of the board before it is included in the budget for such municipality. It's straight from Iowa Code because it's the city of West Liberty's budget subject to audit and all of the additional constraints and restrictions. They have to have full and final authority over the budget. So whether the sentence is in the agreement or not will not change the fact that it's true.
Well, I think the rural, since we're contributing half the money, yeah, the city can have the final say, but they need to have our agreement to make that change.
No, they don't. I'm trying to help you understand. The budget that gets submitted on behalf of the city is the budget. They have to have full control. So the board of the fire group, which, remember, this agreement proposes a new governing body made up of a combo of the trustees and the city for a fire board similar to the ambulance board, because that's also a requirement of the code. So that group's going to put together their budget proposal and they're going to give it to the city, and the city's going to look at it and they're going to work with you on it. But at the end of the day, if they have to make a change to the proposed budget for whatever reason to make their budget work, they have to make that change, and there's nothing, they have to have control, the Iowa code gives them control.
I'd like,
You understand?
before,
I agree.
before we agree to anything.
Yeah, Jamie, what was that Iowa code?
It's Iowa code 28E.32, subpart 3.
Okay, thank you.
Lee, just in case I didn't get that right, could you get that Iowa code section to me?
Yeah.
And then we can get that fixed.
Okay,
Yeah, too.
okay, so we'll, move on. You guys can help Bill, and we'll re-entertain that, at a later date.
Yep, that's fine.
I just included it.
The next section, it looked like there was, some dispute or some changes, looked like, 17, and that is actually, this document's 18, and it basically was changing some dates. We crossed out on or before April 1st, prior to and then, what has been added was by either party at least 1 year in advance of the next anniversary renewal date.
I guess I'd ask, it's Jamie, right?
Jamie,
Jamie, what is normal, language in there for termination of agreements?
So the current agreements contain a 90-day clause, so that's what we copied over with the April 1st. It's 90 days. 1 year is pretty onerous. My advice to the city was I could see maybe looking at something as far out as perhaps 6 months in advance, so you could have a January 1 deadline, but I think 1 year is pretty onerous and quite long when you're talking about an agreement of this nature in this section. But that's up to the parties to negotiate. The April 1 number was in there originally because that's what we currently use. I mean, that's the current agreement has a 90-day clause.
Well, that was my idea, and I assume that wouldn't make it through to this. So, and as I think more about that, I can't speak for everybody, but if you want to skinny that down.
I mean, if you think about it from both perspectives, that causes you to start thinking about a renewal, probably 18 months before it's going to come up. And I don't know that the long range vision of any group is sufficient that makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, you've missed the deadline, and now you may be in it for another 2 years before you can actually, get with. And this, remember, these things are also this is for an automatic renewal on 1 year term. So every year, this agreement renews for another year. So if you had to give a year's notice, you'd have 2 years before you could make changes. And I don't know that either side really wants if you've decided an agreement's not functional, waiting 2 years to modify it off of an automatic renewal schedule is probably too long.
Jamie, what do you think? 6 months, would that be adequate?
Yeah, I think it's certainly better than 1 year, and I wouldn't object to it if that's what you guys like.
6 months, fine.
Yeah. I mean, thinking of your budget process and all that, more about that's just waste.
Sounds like everybody's kind of in consensus, Jamie, 6 months.
Perfect.
Okay. Go down to 19. There was some concerns about 30-day termination of the agreement if either party breached the agreement. And I know that the last meeting we had, the fire board wanted a year notice. That's all, I think, kind of long for when, the reason you have breaches of contract is to penalize the other party if they do violate it. But I also don't think that the city would ever think about not providing fire protection until, you know, something else was worked out. But so Jamie, I'm gonna kind of lean on you a little bit. I know there's been some discussion, and also the Public Safety Committee, if you want to speak up what you guys think. I mean, this is a work session, so.
So I guess the thing to keep in mind with this section is this is a breach section. So this is we aren't getting along, something bad has happened, someone's not holding up their end of the deal, and we've got to find an alternative. The short notice is designed for twofold. One, it's designed to get the breaching party to figure out how to comply, because the consequences are dire. If we don't get a resolution to the problem in 30 days, the agreement could be over. So that's the point of a clause like this. I don't see that being an issue between these two parties. You guys work constructively and well together, but this is the clause that contemplates it's gone to heck in a handbasket, and we either need to get it fixed, need to get our ship corrected and heading in a new direction as soon as possible to care for our citizens. So you need to be able to get out of the agreement. It allows you to then talk, other sections talk about withdrawing equipment, rediverting funds. I mean, it's obviously redesigning your fire protection plan in short order, but it only gets invoked when somebody has breached the agreement and is not in compliance. So if 30 days isn't the number, I don't know what the number is, but 1 year is definitely too long.
I'm gonna throw this out here, or you guys have a suggestion, please throw. Would 90 days be a more appropriate number? I mean, definitely, I don't want, like, I'm with Jamie. I don't ever see where this would be an issue or a problem.
90 days.
30 days strikes me as, if you got a big problem, 30 days, you may be putting everybody under the gun to get it worked out. And it's important, if there's a big divide, you don't want to do it on the rush and do it wrong. You want to have some time to actually take care of it.
And 90 days might give both parties time to try to fix whatever issue and try to resolve it before those 90 days would expire.
Yep.
When you say it was 60 days.
I'd rather go 90.
60 days, that will eat up pretty quickly if you're trying to resolve something.
Just the process that we would need to go to get our group together. I think we can work with 90.
Robbie, you get a thought?
As long as we're happy, then, no, I think a year is too long.
So we would need to make reference change, instead of saying section 17, that would now be 18.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that would have to be corrected. Jamie, your thoughts?
Whatever number you guys agree to, like I said, I explained the rationale for the section. I think your debate over these different numbers makes a lot of sense.
Okay. 90, okay. I'm not hearing.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
I heard 60, so I was wanting to make sure that we weren't 60 or 90 or 90. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. I have 18 that we covered that. The paragraph should be deleted. They thought that paragraph 20. Okay, so this is the one that has crossed out. Under termination of this agreement, the jointly held assets would be distributed to successor organizations providing firefighting services. And then we have a paragraph that is added. You guys want to read that? And if we have any issue with that, I think this was added because we had passed Dahl and Chief Sickles to come up with some.
Yeah. So.
Equipment would be dispersed.
Yeah. So the statute 2080.6 requires the 2080 agreement talk about the manner of acquiring, holding, and disposing of real and personal property used in the joint undertaking. So we have to have something in here that talks about how we dispose of the property if we dispose of the agreement. So we can't just eliminate it entirely, but we can definitely rework it or get a concept that's in there. And obviously, joint ownership of the apparatus and equipment makes figuring out who owns it if we get a divorce difficult. So rather than eliminate the paragraph entirely, I tried a new version that I wrote out there for you to think about and maybe play with to see if we can come up with something that works.
I think on this, we probably need to see exhibit E.
Did you guys have time to do that?
No, we haven't yet. I mean, we just kind of discussed it too,
And that's probably
but
another,
nothing written down.
that's probably another one that needs to be involved in too.
So the goal here was to take everything that's currently owned and figure out who would get to keep it in the divorce. And then it also requires that anything we buy in the future, we decide that up front. So then Schedule E would be created as part of this agreement and then always updated when new equipment is purchased and old equipment is retired, sold off, destroyed, whatever. You would always know what you get in the event the agreement terminates and you guys don't come to new agreement. So everyone understands fire engine A goes here and fire engine B goes there and 6 air packs go here and 4 of these go there. We would always know. It'd be decided.
How finite do we have to get as far as assets? Is there a, under 5,000, don't worry about it? We don't want to count every glove and hood.
I just want a full inventory.
Full inventory? Okay. Tools, hoses.
Yeah.
Okay.
The statute doesn't specify, so I think if you guys agree on what the limit is or how you're gonna categorize things, it's fine, as long as if we could walk into the fire station and figure out where everything's going, then the agreement works.
So is Jamie, how it would work now? Each party would have to go to district court and somebody would decide?
Well, if you were to break up today and you couldn't come to an agreement, then yes, otherwise you'd have to, work on it together. So kind of what I'm proposing is we think about that now and establish, look at the list of current owned equipment and try and figure out where it might go.
But they could lump ambulance supplies into one.
So this is the fire agreement, so let's not talk in.
Okay. They're, I don't know, you wouldn't have to count every single thing.
Because I think making exhibit D exhibit D would just be a daunting task.
So you're saying if you have 50 paper plates, you don't want us to divide them equally?
I mean, if it makes sense.
Yeah,
Plastic silverware, I think that,
you gotta have the monetary value there, I suppose, but
I think we do like PPE, that's turnout gear, helmets, gloves.
Yeah, the problem becomes when we can say that
Apparatus.
you can have everything appraised and you can say, okay, we're just gonna split it 50-50, but nobody can split a fire engine in half. So some of those big assets, you really need to decide who owns the fire truck. They were purchased with joint money. But, so is somebody gonna give the other, so is the city gonna pay the district, $100,000 for truck 4? I mean, I don't know what that looks like. That's just a hypothetical. I don't even know if there is a truck 4, but it's something that needs to be contemplated because the courts don't want to deal with dividing stuff up, which is why this is a requirement of 2080 agreements. And it's a shortfall in our present agreement. Our present agreement doesn't even discuss it. And that's why I put it in here like this. And we talk about, so in the future, new stuff that we acquire, we should decide where it's going when we get it so that it's known from the beginning.
And I think I suggested the curtain dog to try to come up with some type of plan where if, for whatever reason, I couldn't see anything ever happening to where this would occur, but to try to split up the equipment where both entities could operate in a capacity to serve the citizens of, or the residents of each, their constituents. So.
Well, and I would think it would be 50% of everything but the apparatus. The apparatus is the biggest thing.
Yeah, and I think you could
Because
say
of your brush trucks,
That makes
and
sense.
the tanker,
like
not gonna do much good in the city where you need it to pool.
Right.
But as far as everything else, I would assume it's just 50/50. Makes no sense.
Okay.
Well, like the rural probably wouldn't have a great use for the ladder truck.
Yeah.
You're probably gonna have a great.
Well, you got a green bin.
Well, right. And I guess that's where you would hope that you still have a mutual aid agreement after all, if that would happen,
Yeah.
that, you know, that would still be intact.
So I think this is another working document that has to be worked out before we have an exhibit.
Would it be as easy to approach it from a value minus depreciation and come up with a
Set of items.
set of items?
Well, I stuck around and talked to Dog and the other fire guys the other night. And we were wondering, or I was wondering if, you know, if it came to division of the equipment, that could we get an uninterested third party, let's say Toyne or Alexis or Sneal or somebody that knows value of equipment, come in and appraise everything, come up with a dollar amount, and then that dollar amount will be split, and then I guess the parties would have to negotiate on dollars. Okay, we'll take this fire truck, but we'll pay you, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm more familiar with what Jerry's saying, so, so where our equipment revolving, plan runs is that it's based on, a term of years, and then it's depreciation value. And so therefore, when we trade in a vehicle or we move a vehicle, it's based on where it's depreciated at, on that value. And
Well,
again,
part of the
government
problem, unless I misread it, the problem with that revolving 15-year plan you had, it didn't deal at all with any replacement of any of the fire equipment. There you're talking the big bucks, you're talking about everything else, but it didn't address any fire truck replacement.
I believe it's because we didn't get to that full conversation.
Okay, so there's gonna have to be some work on this.
I'm thinking, we don't.
And Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
No.
so, I guess because of what we're trying to accomplish here, it's certainly possible that you could leave yourself open in the agreement to say that, some date in the future, the parties will come up with this plan for all of the existing equipment, and you can agree that any new equipment, you'll figure it out when you buy it, because, I wouldn't want this to be a sticking point. I realize you guys can't come up with a plan in the next, 2 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever it is. You may have to just have in your agreement that under this new agreement, all of the existing equipment will have a plan for it by, December 31st of 2021 or something. So you've set a deadline in the agreement so that you've got time to work with it. Because I understand this is not an easy task, because there's both money values to consider as well as functionality and use. You can't have one department end up with all the turnout gear, Scott air packs, and one fire engine, and the other guy get 4 trucks and a brush truck and no equipment. There's a lot of moving parts to it that I wouldn't presume to try and guess.
Well, we're gonna have some time to work on this, because there's no way we're gonna have this agreement in place day after tomorrow. So I think we agreed that we'll roll over to our current 28E, right? That we'll continue with our current 28E.
If we do not have a current, or if we don't have a new one in place, then the old one will stay in effect. Is that correct, Jamie?
Yeah, absent termination by either party by the drop dead date of tomorrow, the current agreement would roll over again for another year automatically.
Or we need the stuff we agreed upon.
Or you can always agree at any point to mutually stop one and start a new one. right? So you could come together in October of 2021 and have a new agreement that starts October 1st, 2021, and carries through to, you know, I mean, mutual agreement of the parties is always an acceptable option to terminate one and start a new one.
Oh, okay. I was wondering about that, if, you know, it was October,
We don't have to wait till next April.
yeah, we could, if we could, both parties agree, we could do this anytime.
Correct.
Okay,
The agreement only gives you unilateral power to terminate by notice delivered before April 1st of the next renewal date.
If we don't have this, this first figured out, maybe we could just put a paragraph in the agreement, like what you said, that we'll have it ready by December 31st, or, I mean, pick a date, at some point. Because that's not something the fire department's gonna be able to slap together.
No, you want it done with,
We have to provide, so, I mean, if by December 31st would coordinate, so we have to coordinate inventory for insurance purposes. And so by the end of December 31st is when that report is due. And that includes most of the equipment that we're in discussion with.
So where's the inventory from last?
We have it for the insurance purpose. And it's sent
So I'm just saying
to,
that'd be a starting point.
that the chief should have that, because that goes to him to update.
Okay, okay.
I just don't want this.
If he doesn't, then we'll
So
resend
it's
it.
burden for the-
Well, I know in previous years, there were a lot of equipment on that insurance policy that we hadn't had in years, and guns and everything else, and it was a
No,
really mess.
it's up to
It's
date.
up to date.
It is, yeah.
Good, yes,
the fire department had guns?
yes. Well, we paid insurance on them anyway.
No, it was on your inventory.
Well, but it was listed.
Well, here's the thing, I can tell you that our inventory list is up to date and it's current, so long as that information comes from your chief.
Right.
So he's provided us all, and we also base that inventory, so whenever we purchase new apparatus, equipment, you know, your PPE gear, all of that. So all of that information, we collect it and we update it to that spreadsheet. That's how we handle it now.
Good.
And so it was also, 2 years ago, we had it all assessed. There was an assessor that came in, they assessed the building, they assessed the equipment, and
So it might
that,
not be that hard to, come up with. All right.
no, I think the only thing is that just like Eric had said, you know, and like you had said, you know, it's okay, how many Band-Aids are in the cupboard, or, you know,
Yeah.
you just kind of come up with, you
we'll
know,
have some good
paper
categories.
supply or something to that.
Or new equipment that was purchased after this last December 31st.
Okay.
Okay, so Jamie, I got a question for you. Is it in the city's best interest to serve, and I know this was a discussion prior, to serve the termination letter now and work on the project, or wait until we have a new 2080 agreement in fully function to be ratified and then serve it? Or is it always December 1st, so we would then have to reserve it next April 1, even if we had a ratified 2080 agreement, let's just say October of this year?
Okay, let me see if that was a very complex question, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I know that there was discussion, do we serve a termination letter now, knowing that we would work on the old one until the new one was in place? Or do we wait until the new one's already in, we have it figured out?
If the city serves a termination letter now, the current agreement would expire June 30th at midnight. So there would be no agreement July 1 unless a new agreement is worked out and adopted prior to that date and time. So because termination goes with the contract, and the contract is an annual contract from July 1 to June 30. So if you serve your notice to terminate the agreement before April 1st, the agreement will terminate June 30th at midnight. That's not to say that after that you couldn't discuss an extension of 3 months while you continue negotiating, or 6 months or something like that. But legally, the operative effect would be the current agreement would be done June 30th at midnight.
What would be the purpose of terminating this if we,
That's why I'm asking.
if we agree that we'll keep working on this, and if we can come up with an agreement in September, October, or whatever, then we mutually agree to replace, yeah. But I don't,
So if no notice of termination, like I said, it has to do with who has unilateral power, right? So if no notice of termination is delivered by either party by April 1st, the agreement's automatically going to roll over for another year. So you'll operate under the old one until next June 30th of 2022, unless you mutually agree to terminate and replace it with a different agreement sometime between now and June 30th of 2022.
Which is what we're working on, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it's 90 days. I think we have plenty of time.
well, the thing is, why should we go through the termination process and put us on a timeline into June? Because as I had stated at our last meeting, we want to wait until the audit is completed so we can see how that turns out, and that's not going to happen before June 30th, doesn't sound like.
So Dick, as I asked before, let's just, like I said before, the audit says, oh, it's terrible, do you want to terminate? I mean, what does the audit have to, the only way I would see an audit would have any effect on the board is if we owed you money and we couldn't afford to.
Yeah, but how do we know that without the audit being complete? Tell us.
That we owe you money?
Mhm.
I would assume that somebody on your board would have accountability of why we would owe you money.
Well, we're relying on the city to provide us with accurate figures, and it seems like there's been a lot of errors made, so I don't know that anybody feels confident at this point in time that the numbers are correct.
For the auditors in the last audit, there are no errors with our receiving or our expenditures. If the errors you're talking to are errors because of coding, then that's a day-to-day operation thing that has to be worked out between the department and the accounts payable. So the expenditures, according to the auditors, the expenditures have all went through the proper funds. If it's a question about whether the fire line item paid an ambulance line item, to them, that's irrelevant because it's all under the public safety program. What it becomes is a communication and a better documentation between the department and the payable side of it. And that's my understanding is what we have to work on resolving by making sure that we're getting the purchase orders with the documented account line items that they're, because at our side of it, we have to make a decision because we have a timeline to process those payments. If we don't have the documentation to support it, and it doesn't come in to support it, we can't do anything. Once we get into an audit, we also can't go through and change those line item transactions until it's completed. So I guess I have to understand, and again, if you read the audit is not saying that there was any discrepancies. There was nothing to being expensed or receipted incorrectly. What it's saying is that we need to have policies and procedures, which is not uncommon for all of us to have a dual control. So therefore, you don't allow yourself to be in a situation where there can be. And that statement calls for the nonprofit corporation, the library, and the city. All three of those entities were written up on that comments. So there's nowhere in there. And I even reached out to the state auditor and asked, is there any other way we can explain further to help the trustees understand that there was no errors with the revenues and the expenditures, the receiving. And their comment back to me was, that is in your financial report, that's what is stated in there. And the only thing that is stated in there is that if you don't have a procedure or a policy saying how you're going to, one, how are we gonna do the purchase, which we do have a purchase policy and we do have a cash management policy. They're just saying that you need to make sure you follow that and that you have that in mind so you don't run into an error situation.
Well, I guess my concern was when we started these meetings 3 weeks ago, whenever, yes. And we're working on this 2080, which is gonna start with a clean slate. I've got budget reports that says fire and EMS respectively are under budget. And then we came to the meeting and I got the spreadsheet that showed that they had been over budget for a number of years. And then after that meeting, I got another budget report that said, no, they were at 38% and 42% respectively. And then I hear the other night that the vendor that supplies our EMS supplies has cut off our credit because the bill is over 90 days past due. So.
Well, then that would be really nice for them to share that information with me, Mark. I can't do the payables if I don't get the communication from, this is what's very frustrating for me, is because we're trying to manage payments. We're trying to manage those things, but that information is not being shared. And if we don't have the vendor payment, if we don't,
So where
we don't get
does
the
the bill
invoices.
come into? Does it come to the city hall or does it go to the fire station?
It goes to the fire station.
Okay,
If
well,
it's addressed to the fire station,
If you
it goes
understand,
there.
if you understand my concern is that I would like to know before we sign this 2080 agreement that the books are completely clean. And that's why I'm holding out and holding off to not sign it until we get that audit report.
My question
And
is,
that's
what do you mean by not clean? That's what I'm not.
Well,
understanding.
that was probably a poor choice of words. I want to know what the exact figure is and where and.
So the fiscal year 19 one was your exact figure. The
Okay.
current budget that we're in, the current audit that we're in right now, we
can't
don't.
finish that till end of June, right? That's the end of fiscal year, right?
Well, and that's not a guarantee because of the problem that the auditors of state put us in by delaying their release of their financial statements.
But I
So
didn't think the state was doing this audit.
they're not, but our CPA did not get the work papers until February. So now he has to have an allotted amount of time to, and that's what I communicated our last meeting is, his hope was to get it done by June 30th, but he cannot guarantee that
Right.
because of the delay in the work papers. And I guess for me, what's really frustrating is that no one here is seeing the operation side of the administration of those documents, those bills, I mean, that we cannot perform our duty and our task if we don't have all the pieces. And I think that it is, again, what I had recommended is we come together and we have to create a procedure, which we already have, which is a purchase agreement. And then that comes back to training those that are responsible for making sure that they submit that in accordance to that policy, so we can administer the receipting and the expenditures, so then it would line up. The numbers that I provided in the spreadsheet are final numbers that were audited, and they're final numbers within the budget. Now,
You're saying this bill from the ambulance vendor, you've never seen it?
I've not seen it.
See,
And they all
I was
come
told
in.
that you guys had, but I don't know that for a fact.
We'll back it up, we'll figure out if it was sent, and if it was
Right.
not, we can bundle.
Well, let's just take a deep breath here.
Mhm.
Calm down.
you know, I think we're all operating in good faith here, that we all agree that the 2080 agreement that we're operating under is out of date and needs to be updated. I don't think anybody's gonna argue that part. But the issue of concern is that we owe our constituents, our people we represent, you know, are the numbers based, what's in Exhibit D and is going to be accurate. And I think that's the concern, that we have to make sure that we do our due diligence and you do yours to come up with factual data. The number that goes into Exhibit D is based on, you know, credible information. So we're not saying that the numbers are wrong. We're just saying we owe it to the people that we represent that we're making the best decision on the best data that we have. So I would hope that with us meeting, you know, today and with the meetings that have happened previous, that we're making progress towards hammering out what the new wording is going to be, except for those numbers. And I would also hope that the city council would understand the reason we need to have justification for those numbers. I don't think that's a huge ask. We're not asking to blow the whole thing up and go our separate ways. So I hope you wouldn't turn it.
So, and Jerry, and I agree with what you're saying, but the justification from those numbers come from the department because they're the ones that are creating the expenditure. So when there's a question about those expenses or those amounts, that lays at the department head because they're the ones that are approving it. They're the ones that are responsible for the expense. I have no, other than operational things such as the utility side of it. I mean, those are day-to-day operational things. Those are the only items that I can do from an expenditure piece of it. When it comes to the equipment, the supplies, you know, in order to operate the emergency service, that is going to come from the department head, and they're the ones that hold the information about what those items are.
And that's a interior procedure that I don't want to get involved in.
When we're talking about the audit, that's what they're asking. That's what I hear you asking.
And the reason we're requesting is that it's on the audit that I can find. I know on page 8, it talked about the audit evidence. Management is not ensured, adequate documentation is available. And then on page 53 and 54, it talks about the procedures have not been implemented to reconcile billings and collections and receivables. So that puts us, raises the element of doubt whether those numbers are correct. Again, for us to go back to our people and say, yeah,
those are blanket statements. Every year we get blanket statements on our audit as, like, I'll give you one. You guys do not have an adequate way to double check what's the wording where somebody's not stealing money. Okay, the auditors explain every year, I have to sign off on it. They explain, you're gonna get this every year from now until, you know, until the early year, because 95% of the cities in the state of Iowa get this comment because you're not a Davenport, a Des Moines, that you have 200 employees, so you can, you know, so what happens is our employees have 4, 5, 6, 7 different duties, and we don't have enough employees to be able to single out and then have double reference, double checks. So when somebody goes and looks at an audit and goes, oh, wait, this says this, you really have to know why that's being said, and does every city, or does this comment is a general comment to 90% of the cities in Iowa? Okay, there's a handful of comments that is explained, we're gonna get this every year until we get
So-
big enough to be able to have
But
that.
What they want is they want, so when they make that statement, Jerry, what they want us to do, so the city already has, we already do a reconciliation. We already have, so when that was in 2018 and 2019. In 2018, the city, I'll talk about the ambulance service. They changed from TriTech. They made the decision to change from TriTech because they were having a horrible time with the billing. And again, it was a decision to go to PCC because they provide better records. And since we went on with PCC, we have a reconciliation. What the auditors are saying is they want that as an administrative policy to say that we receive a monthly report. We have an employee that reconciles that monthly report with their report. So what they want us to do, and again, we'll get there, but it's, it's been changing. We've had a transition with employees, if you can, be patient with that. But what they want is that you would have all of those steps written out into a policy. Once we have a policy, then that statement goes away. So it's not that we're not doing those steps, we just do not have written policy saying that we're doing that. We do the income offset for collection. We've been doing that since 2017. So we do have a collection process in place, but we don't have what's called a bad debt policy. And again, I would invite anybody to, visit with other cities. These are the same comments or the same things that they're running into when the state is asking for policies and procedures to manage all of those, what they're saying in there.
But we still have, bottom line and all this about, we've been talking about, we still have the problem on a rural level that unless Al's gotten the past couple of weeks,
He has.
a detailed,
Him and Sherry have been working through that. He stopped in and he picked up the invoices. And again, as I said, I'm asking you to stop throwing that back because I did not have knowledge. We went through a change in employees in April of 2020, midst of COVID. We did not have knowledge that that wasn't being done. I did not get any communication from Alan. His communication was not with me to have knowledge that it was behind. So we have worked ahead and we've resolved that and we've got that piece in place. But that's another thing that the auditors are going to say is where's your procedure? Where's your procedure on that?
Jerry,
So those are the complicated things from an operation.
We share your concern. We really share your concerns, but with him, so Dick is asking, I don't think we can provide an audit that is completely to his life. And as far as I know, we have plenty of time to work with these deals. And as my personal part of the safety commission, we are going to find that end of agreement by the dates that you just gave. I mean, we've been to extremes explaining that we are in the process of betterment in the city of West Liberty administration. I bet you 100-to-1 that no city in the state does a perfect audit with the state. No one.
well, still we have, there's other items that need to be redone and looked at, and there's no way it's gonna happen and be signed tomorrow. So again, I feel we're gonna be rolling over the year with our current 2080, and then we continue working on this item.
And then we can terminate and sign the new one when we get it. I mean, there's two items on here that we want to talk to Bill about. And that's not gonna be done tomorrow.
We have 90 days before this thing comes to an end.
So
Well, why do you want to terminate?
Yeah, I guess that's what I don't, but if we could, if both parties agree that we're gonna institute a new 2080B agreement whenever we get it ready, why terminate this and then put us on that deadline for June 30? I don't understand that at all.
We have been rehashing the same arguments for the last 2 meetings. You are not at all uneasy with the audits we provide with the numbers and explanations that we have provided to you, and I don't think there will be an end to that.
Well, put the audit numbers aside, we still have these other items that need to be addressed, and that's not gonna happen tomorrow.
We have 90 days.
So my question, out of due respect to you guys, I was informed, and please tell me if I'm wrong, the consensus of the council is to terminate the contract by April 1. So I will perform, I was not at that meeting, so I'm being told I will go ahead and deliver a letter by April 1 to the fire board by the consensus of the council. But I thought I would let you know that, and that's why I wanted to clarify through the attorney if there was a different reason or some other way to do that.
What's the purpose though?
Here, can I finish, please?
Sure.
I didn't want you guys to leave and then you be hand delivered a letter tomorrow signed by me without giving you the respect that I am honoring the consensus of the council.
So,
Okay?
and just as the mayor is saying, I mean, the only purpose of the termination is following what we currently have in place with the agreements and following that statement where we are to provide the termination. Again, I mean, I guess I was under the understanding that we wanted to get this resolved, because I'm not gonna start performing all of these, things that may be being asked, they have as subcategories until we have an agreement. And I don't want there to be a misunderstanding that we've had a discussion and that we're going to start administrating these items when we don't have an agreement. So, I mean, I see it's a benefit to all of us if you want us to get started on, meeting those requirements that you're asking to make sure that we have a process in place with the billing and the invoicing, and that we have a document that details that agreement to make sure that it's not vague as to, what we're doing or how we're providing it, so we can get about working, with our department and our administration staff to get those things, handed off to. But again, I mean, if you're not in a hurry to have that, then, I mean, that would be up to the mayor and the council what they want to decide, but I guess my understanding is that we wanted to, get these processes in place. The other part is compliance with the 2080 agreement in the state. I mean, I'll guarantee you then that'll come up on our audit and it'll be stated in there that we're not in compliance. Because my auditor's already asked me for all of our 2080 agreements, and he's already communicated that we don't have them listed on the state file, because the previous administration did not file them with the state as they're required to. So again, I mean, those are the main pieces that I'm thinking we're wanting to try to resolve. And these other things, just as, we've talked about, is we can set those deadlines in there like the December 31st. And again, allow you time within the 90 days to clarify, with Mr. Tharp about, the items that we talked about. And if anything, I can reach out to our auditor and see if he can even try to provide us a preliminary report on the receipts prior to the end of June 30th. I can't promise. I think I communicated that last time. And I mean, that's all I can do in order to help you with the financial side of it. But I mean, at the end of the day, if it wasn't coded correctly, it's going to be what it's going to be, because I'm not able to go in and change those codings. Because according to an audit, it's not incorrect because it's in the program.
Can I ask you, if you're going to terminate, is it your intent to sign a new 2080 with us?
Oh, yes,
We'll work
yes,
on this?
yes. And my next question was to Jamie we get to June 1, and we just feel that we're not gonna hammer this hammered out, we can put a paragraph, I think you said earlier, that there's an extension.
Yeah, you could certainly, June 1, June 15, June 29, agree to continue the current agreement for another 90 days while you continue good faith negotiations on a replacement, so that it doesn't automatically renew for another year, but it doesn't terminate immediately on July 1.
Okay, so my reason to make that statement was, I didn't want you guys to leave and then tomorrow or the following day receive a letter that's signed by me as a surprise going, well, hell, we just talked to the guy yesterday and now we have a letter. I've never heard or have any thoughts that we're not in this to be, to assist the fire board. I don't think that's, and like I said, I wasn't at the last meeting, but I was told the consensus of the council was to terminate it and work on it. So that's.
Well, I guess
that's-
to me, and I won't speak for the other three guys, it just sounds to me like the city is wanting to control this procedure, whereas we should be equal partners.
But if we're not equal partners,
We're
if
not-
we're equal partners, you would pay for half of all operating expenses and costs. Is that correct? How much does it cost to operate the fire department ambulance per year?
Their combined budget is over 207,000.
Now, if you guys paid 100 and some whatever thousand, we can talk about a partnership.
Yeah, but you use the revenues that's generated by the ambulance also. I mean, it doesn't, the city doesn't pay, that $200,000, the rural doesn't pay the $200,000. We use the income for the ambulance, right? To help offset the expenses.
Would you say that you pay anywhere close to what the city pays?
I have no idea what
We're
the
carrying
city
all the
pays.
insurance, it's nowhere near. We don't.
You wouldn't carry the liabilities.
That's what I'm saying is this is not a 50-50 partnership. 2080 agreements are not 50-50 partnerships of two entities coming together to be partners. 2080 agreements is for one entity to support and help the other entity.
Well,
Am I mistaken, Jamie?
They can be many different things, but generally you form an agreement because nobody can afford to do it alone, and there's usually a disparity in the resources available to one party or the other.
And I'm not trying to be an asshole or anything like that. I'm gonna sign what I was told the consensus of the council came to and their wishes, okay? Has nothing to do with working with all parties to get this resolved, because I do want to get this resolved.
And their statement is, I mean, their consensus is to make sure that there was communication in there, is that because we're working towards a new agreement. It's not that we're terminated, we're done. But again, I mean,
See,
the
the
understanding
different
is that we wanted to move forward. My understanding is that we wanted to get this worked out, so that we had a working agreement that wasn't vague, that wasn't out of compliance, that it was in compliance, and put some parameters in there that,
And I think everybody wants to work it out, but what I'm trying to see here is if, okay, you're good, you say that we got 90 days, we got 90 days, and you're willing to extend it another 90 days, which gives us 180 days, and why terminate? Why not just keep working on it?
With the idea that
The
we
idea that we'll
mutually.
terminate and sign when we have the new one in place.
Yeah,
Jamie, can you explain the agreement and the termination? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can't speak for the motives. It's just the termination, if we don't want to be locked into another year, has to be delivered on or before April 1st. And so this, as I understand it, the city's goal is not to be locked into this agreement as it reads for another calendar year starting July 1.
But said earlier that if the rural and the city both agree, they can terminate at any time during that year period.
Correct. city has the power to exercise their ability to get out and not be forced into another year, or the trustees for that matter, is to deliver notice by the notice date. So I think this comes down to a motivating factor, if you will, and the council people who are present can probably discuss that, but I think that the goal is, without serving notice, these negotiations could drag on for another year and we could be in the same boat next March and not done. And the city doesn't want to be in that position. So they're trying to
But I,
use the agreement and the terms that are in it to bring about change more timely. Does that sound like, I can't see you guys very well because of the cameras, but I guess let me know if that's maybe a fair explanation, Mr. Mayor.
I think both parties want to hammer this out, but I think it sounds like city council's mind is made up. But I'll just let you know how our procedure works here. Vast majority of our township trustees and clerks and everybody involved are farmers. And getting them together because how we're gonna have to work this out, just get everybody together, here's the new agreement, and here's what it says in English, and interpret all the legal jargon. Do they instruct, the elected representatives to sign on that dotted line? With our nature of our business, it's going to be very difficult to get a bunch of farmers together in April or May, unless it's a rainy day, to go over this. So operationally wise, while we may have 90 days to
We won't have a
get
time of that.
it done, we won't be able to get our group together to make that work. But I do think this group, we can hammer out the framework of the agreement and get this done without being served termination. I think I can speak for this group. You've got a word that we'll keep working with it and try to handle this out. And so we can come up with a new agreement come, say, summer, and we both agree to replace it, like Gina said, we can do and operate. When I said this in the very first meeting, the termination is kind of a nuclear option. We're used to farm leases. If you don't get served by the sheriff by September 1st, you know you've got that farm next year. When you do get served, you can still try to work out a lease agreement, but the odds are you're not going to have it. And so it makes our people, it makes me very nervous that you're going to serve us tomorrow.
What I was trying to do with my intervention, Jerry, was to emphasize the urgency of both parties back and forth, trying to work this out in the best possible way within this time frame.
Well, I think, and like Jerry said, we want to get this worked out too. We don't want this to linger on for another year, because I don't know about you guys. I don't need to go to any more meetings than necessary. But, again, designating it's all going to be done by the end of June, as Jerry says, without knowing what, the next 2 or 3 months weather-wise is going to allow the farmers to do. We may come down to have 20 days that we can actually, get our group together to work on this. And again, if we both, have the understanding and agreement that when we get this agreement reached, that we can mutually agree to do away with the current 2080 and put in place the new one. Yeah, 90 days sounds like a long time, but in reality, with our farming community, it's not.
So I see, I can't speak for the ambulance, but it's almost similar to the fires, pretty close. I mean, there's a few differences because of terms and different
Right.
districts and that. But if I'm not mistaken, it looks like most of this is pretty much done. We kind of agreed upon what I am seeing is, you guys want to talk to Bill about the Iowa code section, whether it's in or out, or even if it's not in, it's still enforceable by Iowa code. You want to check with Bill on that. And then the rewriting to try to clarify the 8A, or how many other subsections that needs to be clarified. And if you look at that, that's about really the two big items in this fire thing, okay? If we can't come to an agreement in 90 days, I guess, on 2 points, we're in trouble. And I'm just trying to look at it in a positive way, okay? And the ambulance, I think, is gonna be a little bit easier, just because we're gonna want the same, we want it to mirror, I would assume, we would want it to mirror similar with the fire, because we want it to be, we don't wanna have two, and every time you have something, you have to look at,
Which is which.
right. So I think once we have the 2 points worked out here, pretty much everything else has been pretty much agreed upon. I mean, you would have to take it back to the other individuals. The public safety committee is already here, so there wouldn't be a lot of issue on our side, other than just taking the council for a vote. And then I would hope that we could, hammer out the ambulance in a timely fashion, because some of those points would already be taken in the fire. Okay, that's kind of what I'm looking at it on a positive way. I can't call a council meeting and have a meeting from what was discussed, two Tuesdays ago. So I'm sorry.
Was that discussion, Mayor, closed? That wasn't part of the normal council?
No, it was just, so again, it wasn't a voted upon because it's not a
Sure,
required
understood.
vote. So the consensus was of the discussion, that part of the process was to go ahead and implement the termination per the agreement, with the understanding that we were continuing to work to have an effective agreement by, July 1. It wasn't that the termination, the means behind the termination had absolutely nothing to do with council's consensus saying they don't want a relationship. It was because they wanted the timeliness of the process to get going and keep going, so we could meet the compliance, so we could get, again, these things have been brought up that are somewhat contentious, for both sides, that we can come to, an understanding of how we're gonna do that. And I guess maybe, where is our happy medium? I mean, so if council's consensus is because they want to put it into motion, so we're doing it, is part of that happy medium that we serve the termination and have a wording in there that we're going to, if it doesn't come to an agreement, that we agree that we want an extension come July 1, if that's a possibility, to meet somewhere in the middle to say, the city wants to have us working on this, and with the understanding, given who the trustees and what they do, may not have the time to come together on that 90-degree, and if that's the case, because of those extenuating circumstances, then, did we have it in writing saying that the city council would say, we'll do an extension for an additional X amount of days? Because there has, again, they're wanting to get it done so we have it corrected and we have it done right before it becomes a bigger issue.
Well, wouldn't a compromise be for 80 days? The possibility of extension? Seems like a lot of paperwork to fill out. If, we're working toward the right thing, and we just add additional days. That would give the farmers time,
Well,
get stuff in the fields.
I think if Lee was talking about if we can't come to a terminate or an agreement by January 30th.
June 30th.
June 30th. Jamie said we can add on, at any part in June that we will extend that period.
So your answer is no to 180 days.
Well, it's per the existing agreement,
Yeah.
right? That's what it has.
And and Jamie and I talked about this when we talked, is I didn't like the word termination.
Mhm.
Jamie, and I said, I hate that word. Because it's not, you know, termination means kind of like a final and a thing, and our discussion, Jamie and I, our discussion has never been a final thing for the, you know, rural board or the city or anything. And I said, we use a different word than termination, but termination is part of a legal definition, in contract. So I don't like that word, but that's kind of the word that's used.
I can ask a question on procedure. Why is it a consensus and not a vote?
I don't think it needs a vote, but Jamie's our city attorney. Jamie?
No, it doesn't require a vote. It just requires a decision, and the consensus can be achieved that way.
Certain things require votes, certain things require ordinances, certain things require resolutions. And I just wanted to make sure, like I said, I wasn't here.
Termination of a legal document doesn't, I'm not saying that, it seems odd to me.
So
Maybe that's the case.
it's when the agreement comes in that it would go before council, and that would be the part that they vote.
So agreeing to the document requires a vote,
Mhm.
but terminating the same document does not.
To serve the notice.
To serve, yeah, to
It's
serve
just
the
to
notice.
serve the notice.
It's included in the language. Is there any way that consensus can be reconsidered by tomorrow?
We would, I couldn't see where we could have a meeting, because we'd have to post it, it'd have to have 24-hour notice. By the time we had 24-hour notice, it would be done.
Well, I guess, you know, and hopefully you can recognize our unease, because when we met the last time, you know, this group, and I know that's not the council, agreed that we just roll over the current 2080. So how do we know for certain, guaranteed, no question, that we'll, you know, come the end of June, if we have not reached this agreement, that we're gonna get another 90 days and the council's gonna say, no, we aren't gonna do that, it's done.
Because we can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, why would they even want to consider?
I don't know, I
There's
guess,
never been
I
any
can't give you a
consideration.
guarantee,
Yeah.
but I'll tell you that I would fight tooth and nail
Yeah.
for this. I don't see it ever happening, but I wouldn't let that happen,
So,
okay?
yeah.
From our perspective, there's a huge sense of urgency that come, and a huge unknown come July 1, what's gonna happen. And so if you set the ball in motion that it's gonna be terminated, and we don't know for sure if you're gonna give us an extension, the possibility exists from July 1, we don't have fire and ambulance coverage. We have not tried to pursue agreements with Lone Tree, West Branch, or Muscatine, or whatever. You're putting us in a huge bad spot.
Jerry, the interest of the city is the same of the interest of the Burning District Fire. We want to provide the services to the community. I would like to know that you guys recognize that we are on the same page. All we have to work is the details.
You've got our word that we're gonna keep working, that's not good enough.
Our perception is very small. Other than to please everybody's expectations about how the city works is not gonna happen. We are a work in progress.
So again, the question maybe for Jamie, and that's maybe where the mayor's going is that where do we communicate so the council can move forward, so they can say that we want to be we want to start the process, and we include in that the letter that we have, if we
If all
have a
parties-
sub-agreement
If
saying.
all parties are not in agreement, an
Yeah.
automatic extension of additional 90 days will be invoked.
Or 180,
Whatever.
again, like you said.
And that's what I was gonna ask Jamie, is there some type of legal assurance we can give that in good faith, we want to work and extend this?
Well, if the city wants to commit to some sort of extension, that requires council action through the appropriate motion, because you're talking about now recommitting to a contract or a portion of it. And I don't believe there's any way possible to convene a council meeting, even a special session for that specific purpose, and meet all of the notice and agenda requirements in advance. You could certainly, start that process immediately, because an extension, so if you serve the notice to terminate, the contract is done June 30th. You would then be negotiating an extension that's going to be an agreement between both parties to extend it for a certain number of days after the termination June 30th. So that's could be as simple as a one-page document, but it's going to have the proper process through the council and through the fire board. The board of trustees would have to convene a meeting to agree, of your group through your procedures and policy to vote on an extension of the agreement. I don't see how that's probably feasible in the next 24 hours, but the, whatever power the mayor and the council members who are present have, you can assure the trustees that you will, submit such a motion to the council for consideration at the earliest possible meeting where it can be presented. But that's going to be a motion to extend a contract, which, Robbie or Jose, they can present that and they can tell you in this meeting that that's what they're going to do, but I don't know that they can do it until a meeting is held and you have to get it on the agenda. I mean, it's just, there's open meetings, rules and procedures the council has to follow. So I don't know that you could walk away today, tomorrow with a guarantee other than a measure of trust that neither side can do these services by themselves. Either side wants to do these services by themselves. So you all want to come to an agreement and you understand the difficulties in doing that before July 1, but the contract has limitations, even to amend it would require action of the council, a proposal, a vote, and we can't do it by tomorrow. So if the city wants to move this timeline along, they have to serve the notice that the contract's going to end, and they can serve you an assurance that right away at the first available opportunity in April, there's going to be a motion before the council to present you with an amendment extending the current agreement for an additional whatever number of days it is, while the parties continue to negotiate in good faith. And that basically kicks the deadline for termination down the road that number of days.
Okay, so let me make sure that I'm clear on this, Jamie, is we serve the termination letter, the first meeting in April, we can put on the agenda to extend the contract as both parties are working in good faith. So what does that then eliminate the termination letter, or no? It just means we'll ask for additional time.
Right, so you've served a notice that you're terminating the contract effective June 30th, and then the next thing you're going to do is effectively amend the agreement to expire July, August, September 30th. I have to do the math in my head on the months. And so your termination notice to terminate the current term would get moved from June 30 to September 30.
And then we run into fall.
Is procedurally. So you really want to get it done as soon as you can. You're just buying yourself some more time to hammer out those last couple of points. And I don't know how quickly an item can be added to the city council's agenda, and I don't know when you next meet. So I can't say for sure what meeting it would appear.
April 6th.
All right, it's added. We're gonna put it on April 6th.
Okay.
Can you list off the things again that you had?
Well, we'll take that as a recommendation from the Public Safety Committee that,
Okay, April 6th, on the agenda that we're
But we're
gonna.
still at the mercy of the council that they agree that we'll be able to automatically extend that if we can't reach agreement.
I don't see council members voting against that.
So their letter includes that, the letter itself is stating that the purpose is due to the existing agreement, but the intent is to continue the relationship. And that's how it reads. So there's no, and there has never, ever been any documented discussion that they have no intent to continue the 2080 agreement.
Okay, Robbie, what did you say? What did you want?
Can you just recap the few things that you have?
Okay.
Make sure.
Okay, the things that, that I thought was big sticking points for us to get the fire department done was paragraph 12. They're gonna check with Bill about, the crossed out, wording, subject to the funding of obligations, I believe is, yes.
And I'm supposed to provide an email to each of them.
And, they're gonna check with Bill, but, Jamie says that's wording that's directly from the state code. The other thing was cleaning up, paragraph 8, 9, and 10 into subparagraphs to make that easier. And was there any other bigger sticking points?
Yeah, coming up with exhibit E on, that final.
Yeah, but that was something we were gonna have to agree upon. I don't think it was a sticking point, it was just that we had to come up with the agreed upon amount or where are we at.
That was
Which-
December 31st when you were talking about that we could utilize the insurance inventory list as a starting point and have December 31st be a deadline, and we'll probably should have it in there that that's done on an annual basis. So we always have a current updated inventory if we were to ever separate on file.
Dick, what paragraph is that? I'm just can't find it.
What is the last one on the fire thing, it's labeled as 20.
Oh, you mean E?
Yeah, exhibit E.
Okay, I thought you said D. I
No,
thought,
excuse me, E.
okay, I thought we had already figured D out.
Couldn't do that without the agreement.
Right, okay.
The exhibit E, how, and you know, that, and I figure that's gonna be worked out all right, but I mean, how can we agree to something that important without knowing what it is?
Correct. And so those are the three main items.
I would
Okay,
say so, what you guys think?
We got those three down?
Yeah,
Just those.
yeah, I just wanted to make sure everything was.
Okay. Guys, I like to have a meeting in an hour or less. We're on 2
You're
hours. And so,
You might blow up next time you're so red faced. I don't understand what that's all about.
is it my can from Florida?
I don't know. Say budget, you get mad. Or,
Reserve. Is that-
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Just so we see you.